Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you really enjoyed the excerpt from our friends at WPBS. Thank you to Mark for including NCPR in this event. And obviously, NCPR also is in our fundraiser right now. So I would be remiss if I didn't say support your local public media. ncpr.org/give is where you can donate to NCPR, but don't forget our friends at WPBS for sure. I'm honored today to be with such a tremendous panel, and I am the host of North Country Bookmarks on North Country Public Radio. I've been fortunate enough to have already interviewed Diane once, and that interview aired. I want to start tonight by reading a little passage that she wrote in her book, When My Time Comes. What is required is talk, real, honest to goodness talk, not only with family, but also with doctors, ministers, and friends. What do you want when you are near the end of life? Diane, what do we need to know going into this conversation tonight? What was the process like when you were writing the book and producing the documentary?
Well, to be clear, the documentary came first. Then, after we had done more than 50 interviews around the country, I then chose 25 of those to include in the book and use them pretty much in their entirety with a little bit of editing. What I think people need to know that we were trying to accomplish was to get the conversation going, that people need to think about what they want at the end of life, not just whether they want to drop dead of a heart attack, which, I think a lot of people would like to do, or die peacefully in their sleep, which lots of folks would hope for, but to realistically talk about the end of life and what kind of care they want, whether they want to go into a nursing home, whether they want to be with friends and family, whether they would prefer everything that medical science can offer, or whether they would prefer to leave it all in God's hands and go whenever God says, take me, or whether they would like every single thing that medical science can offer. That's the conversation that people need to have with their loved ones, their doctors, their friends, to talk about the end of life, because none of us gets out of here without dying. And therefore, dying is part of life, and we don't talk about it. It's the last taboo in our society, and I think we need to bring it out of the closet and talk about what we want. So I hope that's the takeaway from the film, the takeaway from the book, and the takeaway from this discussion.
Perfect. So we're joined by other panelists aside from Diane. We've got Sean Whitehead, the chaplain at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York. We've got Udo Schucklink, and he's from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And Diana Woodhouse, who is the executive director of Hospice of Jefferson County in Watertown, New York. Sean, I want to start with you and ask if you could talk to us a little bit about death as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity and for the gift and privilege of being with these amazing panelists. And Diane Rehm, peace and blessings to you and all the work that you have done. the book is literally life-changing, and I'm looking forward to the documentary. One of the things, well, not just one thing about death, but I think that we have a death aversion mentality here in our communities and in our society. We live in what is, considered kind of a death-denying culture. Culture helps us avoid our mortality. We put death on a mental and emotional shelf out of the way, and we are stunned every time that we have to go to that mental and emotional shelf and retrieve it, as if we can't believe that we are here. I believe that we fear death and think of it as the enemy. Hence, we fear the conversations around death. We fear the one sure thing in our lives, as Diane Rehm just said, that we are going to die, all of us. And so, viewing death as this unexpected reality is so unhelpful, because yes, even if the death is unexpected, even if it is painful, it is not outside of life. Death is a part of life. It is a segment of our lives. In the book, Diane Rehm says that death is an integral part of our lives, and it is not easy wrapping our heads around that truth, though. But it is a part of our lives. Some of the fear comes with, I believe, the linear way that we think of death here in the West, this notion of we are born, we live, and we die. And I believe that we wrestle with this sense of nothingness that we attach to death. What then? What else is there? But one of the things, sometimes I think about African societies and their continuum. There is a continuum acknowledged amongst African societies where there's the living dead, that's the past, those are ancestors. We, the present, who are the living, and then there's the future, the unborn. And so communication occurs between and among all of these elements on this continuum. The other thing I'll name is I made sure to make a note of this. When my mother was dying in 2009, it was life altering, obviously. And I was born in a deeply religious context and community, and I was really struggling with all of the kind of religious idioms that were coming my way, and even some scripture. And one of the things, Celtic wisdom helped me. There is an old Celtic proverb that boldly places death right at the center of life. Michael Meade, he says this, and then I'll wrap it up here. He says that death is the middle of a long life. Ancient people did things like that. They put death at the center instead of casting it out of sight, and leaving such an important subject until the last possible minute. And so I think that it's important that we learn to face our discomfort with death, to sit in it, to allow ourselves to ask questions that maybe we've always wanted to ask, but we're too afraid, depending upon one's culture, one's family. There may be a taboo in even approaching such matters. Some of us only deal with death and dying when it happens in our lives, with the death of a loved one, or when we receive a medical diagnosis that forces us to face death. But I believe that it can be liberating when we allow ourselves to confront and face death and ask questions of it. Is there anything on the other side of this existence? Are my thoughts at odds with my religious tradition? What does my religion or spiritual tradition say about death and dying? Is this all there is? When I die, will my life have meant something? What is it like entering death? Is there any kind of awareness or consciousness within death that lets me know I'm dead? These things people have these questions. And I think that when we face it, when we begin asking the questions continue to really pour out of us. And so, really facing death is really I think it's critical to our living, and it brings a certain peace to us, so that we are not asking these questions and facing the notion of death at the quote unquote last minute, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Udo, a question for you that I had. I know Canada has a new law which was recently passed regarding medical aid in dying. Could you give us some information on what that means for Canadians?
Yeah, certainly happy to. So Canada is interesting because we are now on course. In about 2 years' time, we probably have the most permissive assisted dying regime in the world, together with the Netherlands maybe and Belgium. And the reason for this is that, unlike what Diane has been talking about initially, that you do not have to be actually close to the end of death in order to be eligible for medical assistance in dying. And the main reason, and this is, by the way, supported by the vast majority of Canadians. If you look at surveys, this is not even a very controversial thing. There has been opposition to that, but you're looking at support in the about 70% of Canadians in favor of this. The main consideration, the main ethical consideration under sort of supporting this legislation has been the following, basically. People have considered that there is a fair number of patients that suffer from disease conditions that are chronic, that are irremediable, and that they find intolerable. So they do not consider their life worth living. They have decisional capacity. So it's not a matter of them being depressed or irrational, any of these things, psychotic. And they have been suffering, many of them for decades, from disease conditions that they have basically decided this is not worth living any longer like this. Such patients in Canada will be eligible for medical aid in dying. And the important bit then here is not just to bring about an inevitable death, because that is kind of trivial. Our deaths are all inevitable. But what people are usually talking about when they say terminal illness, what they have in mind is something like 6 months. We are talking about people that could potentially live for decades with a condition that they consider not worth living. And the question that Canadians need to ask themselves basically is whether they thought that these people are not worse off for having to live that much longer, or having to kill themselves in some horrible ways, jumping out of buildings or shooting themselves or whatever else, or having a dignified death surrounded by their loved ones that Diane has been talking about. So this is the background, really. There has been significant opposition in Canada, to be frank, from disability rights groups saying, yeah, but our support system is really not perfect for people, for disabled people. What if a result of this, they will ask for assistance in dying? So this, I'm not suggesting this has not been hugely controversial, and the dust is still settling, let's put it this way, but the law is in place.
Interesting. Diana, and a question that I have for you, as a representative of hospice, obviously, I think a lot of people have a personal connection with hospice. I know,
Yes.
2 of my grandparents passed away in hospice care at their house. What is Hospice of Jefferson County opinion, along with all of hospice, on medical aid in dying?
Well, I can't speak for all hospices. But as noted in the book, the National Hospice Organization and our New York Hospice Association does not support the legislation for medical aid in dying for a variety of reasons. Our job as hospice is to help prevent suffering and help people die with peace and dignity. So we have trouble across the country, and particularly in New York. We have the least number of hospice attended deaths of any state in the country. So we can't talk about death at all in New York. So what Diane's book hopefully will bring is that openness and maybe more permission to have that conversation, which we struggle with every day. So to bring in, our opinions generally are people aren't afraid to die, they're afraid of the dying process, and they want to die in comfort, and they want to die with dignity, and they want to die with control, all of which are, there's many examples in the book, it's constant. So that providing people control is really important to us. That's what we do every day. The patient and family care plan that we write is, what do you want? That we meet patients where they are. So I had a conversation this morning with some of my staff about, they knew I was going to do this evening. I said, what do you think about this? If this becomes legislation that's available in New York, how do you as a care provider in our hospice approach this? And they're like, well, it's their decision. We'll be there, and we'll be there with them. So not all hospices, as noted in the book, would support that. I do believe that we would allow patients to make that decision. Obviously, I'm anticipating the legislation, if it ever passes here, would be very similar to other states that would have to be self-administered. We would not do that. But we can attend and be there and be supportive. But you never know until you get there until you see the day. But, we are very anxious for people. I always say, unless there's rapture, none of us are getting out of here alive. Same thing that everybody else supports, that we really need to have people talk to their doctors. And I think physicians need to be open and honest with their patients about what your disease is, what we can treat it. And I'm all about hope, but giving false hope to me is a crime. And we see that every day, patients suffering needlessly for months, if not years, when they could have benefited from more appropriate treatment, and particularly an earlier referral to hospice. And we can help guide and nurture the family through that process. There's a lot of healing often that needs to take place at the end of one's life. There's not only a bucket list to address, but there's oftentimes we find families that have had significant issues during the course of family life that need to be healed. And if their families aren't given that time to do that, I think that's not acceptable. So I could talk on forever, so I'm sure you have questions.
I do have a follow-up question for you regarding what you said. What would you suggest families do when perhaps I'm on one page, or like Diane is on one page, and the rest of our family is on a completely different page, and the communication really isn't there? What would you recommend families do in that type of instance?
So we recommend, and we do get families that call and ask questions. We can have meetings with our social workers to help them kind of sort out what are the dynamics or issues they're dealing with. But they really need to have a discussion with their primary provider about what they're dealing with, what the options are, and be open and honest about that. What you read at the beginning, open and honest conversation, is absolutely at the crux of all of this to move forward, to have death not be on the bookshelf, as you said. We can help facilitate some of those conversations and help people get to clarity. And we do that throughout the process once people are admitted.
Thank you. Diane, we have a viewer question, which conveniently ties into my next question for you. Were your opinions on medical aid in dying always this strong, and what led to your position?
Well, first, if I may comment on all of your statements, I understand and appreciate exactly everyone's perspective. And Udo, I think Canada has moved forward in a way that eventually the United States may follow. And Diana, I would say to you that once you see the film, you will hear two physicians say that an estimated 25% of those who are dying cannot have their pain relieved. It is simply within them and not possible. And Sean, I would say to you that life is so precious, and I totally agree. We have no idea where we are going or how we are going. My mother died at age 49 of liver disease. She begged to die, I was 19. She was in a Roman Catholic hospital, which has been the strongest and best funded opponent to medical aid in dying in the United States. Several years ago in Massachusetts, 65% of the population voted in favor in a referendum for medical aid in dying. The Roman Catholic Church stepped in with $5 million and defeated that proposal. 11 months after my mother died, my father died of a broken heart. And so at 19, I lost both my parents. My husband, John Ream, had severe Parkinson's disease. He could no longer feed himself. He could no longer stand on his own. He could no longer toilet himself. He was then attorney for the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. He felt that he was losing all dignity and that if he continued to live, he would go further into indignity. And so he asked me to call our daughter, who is a physician in Massachusetts, our son, who is a vice president of a university, and his doctor into his room. He said to all of us, "I'm ready to die, and doctor, I want you to help me." Sadly, he was in Maryland, which did not then and does not now have medical aid in dying, though his doctor had already said he was in that 6-month period. My daughter hollered over the phone, "But Dad, we can keep you comfortable." And John Ream said, "Damn it, I don't want comfort. I am ready to die." So we all left. And the next day, I came in with a wonderful photo album of his childhood that I had made for him. And he looked absolutely marvelous. His skin was pink, his eyes were bright, and I said, "Sweetheart, what's going on? You look wonderful." And he said, "Sean, just to underscore your statement," he said, "I have begun the journey." He had stopped eating, he had stopped drinking water, and he had stopped taking medication. It took him 10 long days to die. And if I could have moved him to Canada, Udo, I would have done so. If I could have moved him to Oregon, which established the first law in the country for medical aid in dying, I would have done so. I feel that everyone deserves the right of choice. And if you don't want medical aid in dying, you don't ask for it. If you want everything medical science can provide, you ask for it. And if you want medical aid in dying and you live in a state, now 10 states plus DC, and you can't move to Canada and establish residence, you ought to have that as well.
Sean, I know you also read Diane's book. I'd like to hear from you. What were some of the takeaways you had as the chaplain of St. Lawrence University, but also a person who has had, experiences with death in family members?
Wow, I would say my main takeaway from When My Time Comes is the notion of the patient autonomy matters.
Mhm.
This book really helped me think about and truly understand that patients should have a voice regarding their lives, and we should be able to dictate and name, here's the thing, what suffering looks like and feels like.
We should be able to determine that, not the doctor.
That's it. And often that's one of the things that happens, patients are already dealing with loss on so many levels. And again, physicians should not be the ones making the judgment and the decision on how much someone is dying. We have, I don't know the data, but I do know that there are people who really do wrestle with maybe some physicians not believing their level of suffering. One of the things I grew up with, really understanding why, as an African American, many African Americans are mistrustful of medicine and medical science because, and some folks feel their thoughts and feelings are not taken seriously, but also because of what is the word, malfeasance in medical science that has happened to certain populations in our country.
Tuskegee, for example.
That's right. That's exactly it. Absolutely. And so those kinds, so patient autonomy is really very important. Also, one of the things I'm so grateful to you, Ms. Ream, because the power of story, it is everything. The power of story shifted. I watched the ways in which it shifted some of the medical students who are in med school to hear certain, lectures and things like that. But just their stories were helping me in my own shifts around the issues.
So glad. One thing that we noted within the film, and I wonder, Udo, whether this has happened in Canada, when younger students, medical students, third-year students, were hearing about medical aid in dying, so many of them looked at each other and said, well, of course. I mean, people should have the right to choose, whereas older doctors trained in an era where the doctor was God. The doctor made all the decisions. The doctor said what you should have and what you should do next. That era is passing. And I remember speaking to one doctor in Washington State, and I said to her, when do you say to a patient, I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do? She said, never. And that's the part I really have a problem with.
Yeah.
Udo, surely doctors do not say that to their patients.
Well, I mean, I have to be honest, I think part of the problem is that pro-choice campaigners have probably made at some point a strategic mistake when they reduce this conversation to pain. Because to a significant extent, because it was always about the pain that people experience when they are imminently dying. And when you look at surveys in any country that has assisted dying today, you will realize that that is part of the issue, but there is a much bigger issue, and you have alluded to this. You talked about the loss of control, the loss of dignity, and the kind of existential suffering that goes far beyond pain, and it cannot be controlled by blasting people with pain medication.
Pain is number 6
Exactly.
on the list of
Yeah.
reasons people want to die.
Yeah. So you will find also that people are in fact prepared to accept some pain to maintain their dignity. That's the other part. They are not prepared actually to be basically zombies full of medication, but really not themselves any longer, especially not towards the end of their lives. So people will make all sorts of choices here. And as I really think part of the issue is that those who campaigned in favor of assisted dying reduced it to pain for far too long. That's why we are stuck, I think, today with this conversation. It's all about pain, and given the right medication, they'll be fine. This is all nonsense, because the problem goes really deeper. It's about existential suffering that people experience.
And Diana, I want to say to you, I think hospice and palliative care are absolutely wonderful and comfort patients for so long. But there does come a time when I believe that a patient should be able to say to a hospice caregiver or to a palliative caregiver, I don't want to die sleeping. I want to be able to say goodbye to my loved ones. I want them with me. I don't want to be in a narcotic state. I want to have my family with me. I want to have them drink champagne and talk about the good lives we've had together and how much we appreciate each other. And then I want to go with my husband, my children, my grandchildren into my own room and be able to die.
Diana, I want to ask a quick question that sort of relates to that. Do you think that families, it sort of piggybacks off of this conversation, do you think families have a sense of guilt when they are administering medication and they sort of are putting these people in a...
You can't do that. You can't do that. No one can administer the end of life medication.
No, I was talking about like morphine or something for pain.
Yeah. Just that I'm going to...
Oh, for pain.
For pain, yeah.
No. I'm in a green office, so I haven't been moving and my light just went out. Sorry. So I don't think so. That's not the sense that I hear from my staff, that there's, we work very carefully with our families, and we're a non-interventional hospice. We don't use any needles on anybody at any time. All our interventions are oral or rectal or transdermal, and we have incredible success in terms of controlling people's pain and nausea. Those seem to be the biggest issues. For us, it's if we had patients referred to hospice when they're eligible, 6 months or less to live, we get patients at 24 hours, 12 hours, 2 hours. We had a patient, we have a residence here, we have an 8-bed residence. So they can either be admitted here or home. So I think I often use the term, it's the opposite end of midwifing. We spend so much time in preparation for birth, and we have birth plans, and everybody comes to celebrate. But we need to do the same thing when people are dying, to celebrate the death, the life this person has lived. I think there's a quote in your book that I just loved. Let's not cry that it's over, let's smile that it happened. That we can help people prepare, like you said, where are those, who haven't you seen? What do you want to do yet? There's so many undone things at the end of life, and death isn't always elderly people. We have many middle-aged, young people in hospice, and even past hospice, the whole advanced directives. We have a whole initiative just to get people to fill out their advanced directives. We supply them to the doctor's office. We pay for them. Just have the conversation. Every day people leave for work and end up in ICU. And in fact, the family has no idea what that person wanted. So, that the role for conversation is huge. We have to have that. And then, Ellen Goodman's conversation project, her favorite line is, have this conversation over a glass of wine, because you can't have it over a ventilator.
And it takes more than one conversation.
Absolutely. And you can change them, but you need to have them. What do you want? How do you want to be treated? And, stay in control. I think people panic because it's too late. And patients and families are, I don't want to say a problem, but, doctors, we have so many options. I've been a nurse for almost 50 years. There are so many, and I was an oncology nurse for many of those years. There's so many treatments that are available that weren't before. We can cure cancers that we never could cure when I was working in oncology. So we have this myth that, as a society, that we can manage anything. We can put a person on the moon, we can cure anything. So what else is available, doctor? And there are, those 0.000% of one person out of 1,000 might have a response to a new treatment. So instead of being, really clear about your chances of being successful with continued treatment, and the family wants to hear that, and they ask the patient to continue to do that, it's really a very difficult discussion. I call it the dance of discussion, that, we need to be a little closer with each other in terms of understanding and being clear about what you want and saying it when you have the wherewithal to say it.
Right. Udo, we have a question that came in, and it also sort of partners with a question that I had for you. Regarding eligibility in Canada, it seems very different from what might be an option in the United States. The audience member, Jim, mentioned that one of his greatest fears is developing dementia or Alzheimer's, and the bill under consideration in New York would not allow advanced directives for medical aid in dying. What are your thoughts on that? And can you give us a little bit of information on how that's taken care of in Canada?
Yeah, so advanced directives, the idea of advanced directives is basically that while you're competent to make decisions for yourself, but you also understand that, say, because of dementia or Alzheimer's or some other situation, that in the foreseeable future, you will lose your decisional capacity. So you want to make decisions with regard to what should happen to you, or in brackets, to your body, when you are unable to make that decision for yourself. And this is what advanced directives are for. Canadians at the moment in the current legislation will not allow advanced directives. The only thing that is possible is when you have already been approved for medical assistance in dying. If in between that approval and your request and the actual euthanasia, for sake of a better word, if you lose capacity, then you will still be able to receive euthanasia, but you cannot say make an advanced directive for something that might be 2 years down the track. What's the reason for this? The first reason for this is that there is a great practical difficulty, and the great practical difficulty is for people to foresee what could happen 2 years down the track. What exactly are the options that will be considered at that point in time? And they might be able to say something vague, but then who is going to interpret this? Will it be a proxy decision maker? Will it be a doctor? Will it be lawyers coming in? So there are major problems there. For me as an ethics person, there's a conceptual difficulty, right? And the conceptual difficulty is the following. The point in time when the advanced directive would kick in, this is the weird part, is precisely when I'm not there anymore. So really what I'm talking about is that I want to make a decision for really, yes, my body, but not myself. This is the important bit. So it's perfectly conceivable then that there's somebody there who, yes, has dementia, but when we look at what this person is doing, probably is enjoying The Simpsons on television and is gobbling up some jelly and is happy probably. Why on earth should anybody enforce an advanced directive and end that person's life when the quality of life is really good at that point in time? So this is an ethical difficulty with regard to advanced directives. it's not straightforward that you say. The only reason why we do this is really that we think it's the only way to control that a life can be ended, that our life can be ended when we have lost capacity, because we do not trust others being able to do that when the quality of life is so bad that it should occur, but we can't ask for it any longer because we have lost capacity. Sorry to be so long-winded. I hope that was clear.
Diane, you have something to add?
So, Jessica, what I have done and what you will all see in the film, I have my grandson record me on his cell phone while he is being recorded by the videographer. So it is in the film. And I tell him that this is for my whole family, that should I begin, just begin to show signs of dementia of any kind, and we all know that's a great big category, or Alzheimer's, that I must have them tell me what they see, because I will probably be perceiving it myself, but I want them to confirm for me what they see. I will not live through 10 or 12 years of dementia. I will end my life because I have seen too many people in that situation. I do not wish to live in that situation. And so my family knows, the doctor knows. I have switched from a doctor who said she did not support end-of-life actions to one who did. But again, it is the individual who must take control of life. And people say, well, what's the difference between medical aid in dying and suicide? And I'll give you one small example. A woman of 37 years old who had breast cancer that had spread throughout her body, had been told she had 6 months to live, had the medication. She said to me in the film, if I had my druthers, I would live until I am 90. But I have a 13-year-old son. I know I am going to die. I do not want him to see me suffer. An individual who commits suicide has a choice to live for now, to live as long as life lasts. She did not have a choice. She knew her life was going to end. Therein lies the difference between medical aid in dying and suicide.
Okay, so Sean, I'm going to ask you this question, but Diana, I'd like you to sort of weigh in on it as well. Is medical aid in dying being talked about on the campus of St. Lawrence University? And do you think it needs to be talked about more with younger people?
So the thing is, I'm in the academy. So the thing is, there, ideas, people are always wrestling with ideas in all kinds of ways. However, I have not been a part of these conversations if they're happening. I don't want to say that they are not happening somewhere, but I have not, St. Lawrence, there are all kinds of symposiums, workshops. Our curriculum is so vast, and even our co-curriculum co-curricular indexes are very vast. However, I have not seen this particular subject of medical aid and dying on our campus. Obviously, we deal with death and dying because we know that death and dying happens to all populations. It happens within the student population. It happens to students in terms of what goes on in their families, et cetera, faculty and staff. But I have not seen, no, not this conversation. And yes, I do believe that it should be a conversation that is had with younger and younger people, especially as this legislation moves throughout our country. And so this is not, again, this is not a conversation for, you know, for later. When is later? I mean, death and dying are a part of our lives. All of us will not live to 90. And so, yes, it is something that needs to be a conversation that needs to be had as soon as possible. Again, we need to retrieve, first of all, death and dying from that mental and emotional shelf. And it needs to be right here. And so medical aid and dying needs to be one of the conversations that needs to be had, because it's going to find itself within our families, within our churches and temples and mosques. Yes.
As I mentioned earlier, it is now happening among younger students in medical schools. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is going to change minds, because the younger students have seen parents or grandparents suffer. I had one legislator say to me, "We are all one bad death away from supporting medical aid in dying." I've had a number of bad deaths in my life, and I can only hope and pray that discussions like this will help people to understand that each of us has a right to deciding what our own death will be. I mean, Canada is now in the forefront, and even for those who go to the Netherlands with severe any kind of illness but have not been determined to be within that 6-month window that we have arbitrarily decided is what should be the deciding factor here in the U.S. I think the idea is gaining widespread acceptance. When we first began doing the film, there were only 3 states that had medical aid in dying. We now have 10 plus the District of Columbia. So I do believe these conversations will make a difference, Jessica.
Diana, I want you to chime in on that. We did have a question from a viewer regarding this from Teresa and Carol. They both asked, who should initiate conversations about a person's wishes, particularly in the case of adult children and elderly parents who are not inclined to bring up this topic?
So difficult. And remember, not one conversation, but many. And if I were in that situation now, remember way back then when I was 19, my mother had been in and out of the hospital so many times, but nobody ever said your mother is dying. So it is the children.
Right. Yeah, a family member should start this, and we have
absolutely.
We have a document that we use called 5 Wishes.
Yes.
This is a wonderful, really soft way to go through a conversation about just, it starts like, because I want to do what you want. I'm your daughter. But you need to tell me what you want. So let's go through this so I can record it. We can change it at any time. And so, it goes through the person I wanted to make the decisions for me when I can't. Who is that? That person needs to be asked, not just assumed. And you have to tell them what these are, the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want, how comfortable I want to be, how I want people to treat me, and what I want my loved ones to know. And there's ways to record this in a very soft way. We have this god-awful pink form called a MOLST, Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It's scary as heck. When I had to sign that for my father, I've sat vigil with both of my parents. So this is hard to do, to sign that, and it's just in your face. This is nice blue, it's soft. On the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, Ellen Goodman's Conversation Project also has a document you can download to guide that discussion. We have a palliative care program that our nurse practitioner can help with those conversations. Physicians are really generally not good at having these conversations. This is like an hour-long conversation at minimum, and it's more than once, and they don't have that kind of time in the office. Not saying anything disparaging. We have wonderful physicians in the community. But this takes some exploration in the conversation.
One more organization, Compassion and Choices.
Yes,
in
yes,
this country.
Yeah, and you don't know what you're going to do till you're there. What I say I want today, I may change my mind when I get there. That's document is very flexible to do that.
Could be.
Something may show up. Yeah.
But right now, at age 84, I feel very, very strongly that should I not have it here in Washington, D.C., which I do, I promise you, I would move to Oregon, where I get my voice treatments, where I already have a medical presence, or I would move to Canada and establish residency there, which most people cannot
get across the border.
Right now you can't because of the border, but eventually, hopefully.
What is the necessary establishment of residency, Udo, in Canada?
I don't understand your question, but the point is you need to be a legal resident or a Canadian citizen.
And
how do you become one?
What does it take to establish residency? 30 days, 60 days?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Canada is a different country. You cannot just go there and live there for a while and become a resident. When I go to Florida, in winter, as we all do, I don't become a resident in Florida, right? It doesn't work like that. I'm just there for a while and then they kick me out. Otherwise, I'm in trouble. And the same would be true in Canada. So quite genuinely, and I'm not an immigration lawyer, you have to go to the Department of Immigration website and they have a box ticking thing there and you tick the right boxes. The point is you can do this in the United States, as you know.
So I'm glad I live in Washington, D.C., where the law is in place and I have a doctor who supports medical aid in dying. I feel very grateful for that.
We need to wrap our conversation up. I want to go through everyone on the panel and sort of give you an opportunity to say something that maybe you learned or you took away from this conversation. But I personally would like to say, when we're talking about having conversations with family members, and if you listened to my conversation with Diane before, you've probably heard me say, I read this book chapter by chapter. I read a chapter every single night, and I called my mother every single night when I finished that chapter, because I wanted to have these conversations with her. I'm 37, and my daughter and I, she's 10, and we were able to have these conversations. It's not fun. but it has to happen.
Right.
And I really think what you're doing, Diane, is putting this in our face and saying it's time to have the conversation. So I really appreciate that. Diana, I'd like to hear anything you took away from the conversation this evening.
Well, I really enjoyed listening to everyone, and Diane, as everyone else has said, anything that you can do to advance the country at large, local communities, really just family members opening up and having a conversation about, you want to maintain control, then let's have the conversation, because that's how you get there. And medical aid in dying can be part of that desire and that wish. The sooner you know that, the better, because if you do have to move, you better know that at the time.
Very
But,
true.
Yeah.
Udo, I ask you in Canada, what if you had any takeaways from our discussion today?
Well, I think the important takeaway for me was that we all seem to agree how important it is that we are able to have a conversation about these issues with our loved ones, with our doctors, for instance. And my important takeaway then was, though, thank goodness we have it in place so we can actually talk about it. Because if it's illegal, how do you talk about these matters? It reduces your choices already, right? So so that was my takeaway. I thought, yeah, and you can tell, in fact, because of that, we have these conversations in many countries today precisely because the options for patients have increased, and that's, I think, is a good thing.
Sean, your perspective?
Again, I'm just so grateful that this is now a conversation. It's even made it more of a conversation in my own life as I journey with people who are dealing with death and dying, and the ways in which it has been so close to my life, losing my partner and spouse just a year ago. But as I think about the pandemic that we are experiencing, people are having to wrestle with death and dying in ways that they never did before. And so if we could kind of have a sense of, this is a part of who we are, and again, the notion of story, the power of story, those medical students shifted my own understanding and thinking, and especially because some of the medical students were Muslim, Roman Catholic, and the like. And so, the wide spectrum was very helpful in the stories that you brought. And so I'm just very grateful and honored to be a part of this conversation with all of you.
Diane, any last thoughts from you?
If you believe that God should be the only decider, I support you totally. If you want everything that medical science can offer, I support you totally. And if you, like me, choose medical aid in dying, I will support you, and I hope you will support me as well.
It's been a treat and a privilege to speak with everyone. I want to thank Mark again from WPBS for helping coordinate this. And I'm honored to be a representative of North Country Public Radio. Again, you can make your contributions to support two worthy public media organizations such as WPBS and NCPR. We really thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. This will be saved, and you can always go back on the WPBS YouTube channel to rewatch it.